Hey, welcome in. We've got Christina Long here. Kind of a busy week in Razorback sports. A lot going on, especially for one of the last weeks of June. Of course, stadium naming rights for Arkansas football. That's the big story of the week. Dave Van Horn spoke to reporters today, gave us an off-season update on his team. Of course, NBA draft. Razorbacks had three players picked this week in the draft. We'll kind of get into all of it today on the podcast. I want to tell you that we're brought to you by Eggland's Best. In Arkansas, greatness starts early before the pads go on, before the crowd roars. The day begins at the breakfast table. Eggland's Best delivers superior nutrition with more vitamin D and less saturated fat than ordinary eggs. You can start strong with Eggland's Best. Better taste, better nutrition, better eggs. For more information, visit egglandsbest.com. Also brought to you by Bentonville Glass. They've been serving their community since 1971. They're committed, professional, and versatile. If you're looking for a quality leader in Northwest Arkansas, looking for skilled craftsmanship, you can look no further than Bentonville Glass for all your glass market needs with the highest quality products. You can come by and see them now at 507 South Main in Bentonville or online at bentonvilleglass.com. Not in the studio today. We got some work going on down at the office, so we're on the road, so to speak, although I'm sitting in my home office. And Christina, she's sitting at a coffee shop somewhere in Northwest Arkansas. The stadium naming rights, I feel like this kind of came out in two waves. There was the initial news that came out on Wednesday, which is that Arkansas's partnered with Community America Credit Union for 13 years for stadium naming rights at Razorback Stadium. No financial details announced as part of the initial announcement, but we found out today, Christina, you reported at wholehogsports.com, $70 million over 13 years. That's an average of roughly 5.4 million per year. And that's the largest in college football history to date. I say to date because this resets the market. Next big team that goes out and looks for stadium naming rights, they're probably going to be able to get a big payday based on what Arkansas has done. You've done a lot of reporting on this. I have too. I wonder what your thoughts are, though, on this naming agreement and how it seems like Arkansas has maybe reset the market a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, this is the biggest that we have found. There's a handful of deals that have been disclosed at private schools, and the details haven't been reported. But the biggest before this was USC. Which what's funny about this? So they play at LA Memorial Coliseum. Everyone just calls it the Coliseum. I did not know until I was doing this research that there is a naming rights sponsor there. It is United Airlines Field at LA Memorial Coliseum. They paid about, I think it's 4.3 million per year for that. And it's funny because I don't know how many people know that it's called United Airlines Field. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm the only one that didn't know that, but I didn't know that. And so I thought that was kind of funny that that was the previous largest deal, and I don't know how effective that's been. That's been there since 2019 was when they announced that deal. So this resetting of the market is really interesting. They had said kind of when they were going on sort of the speaking tour with Ryan Silverfield. Some officials had said that this was going to be the biggest deal in college sports. And then when they came out with this announcement and didn't have any of the details, everybody kind of said, okay, so show me where that is. How do I know if that's true or not? And today I was able to find out that, yes, that is true.
Mhm.
With the way this breaks down. Now, this one thing I want to emphasize is this does not mean that they will receive a payment of $5.4 million every year. That's not how any of these deals, that's the average annual value. So it will be it's broken up in different ways. Arkansas, the name's not going on the building until 2027, but the deal starts this year. So there's different parts of the deal that are starting different times. So it is not a check that gets written for $5.4 million every year, but that's just kind of the average annual value.
And I mean that's how these things are reported.
Right.
It's there's like you think about coach contract. You say that his average annual value is, let's say, $6.4 million, but it may not be $6.4 million the first year. There's
Right.
there's stair steps that are built into that contract, and I would suspect there's probably an element of that to this agreement with Community America. The public reception to this was not real favorable on day one. I think it surprised some people that it wasn't as favorable, or that maybe the reception was that it was on Wednesday. It does seem though, and I thought this would be the case, that when people found out that it's for the most money that's ever been paid for stadium naming rights, and not just the most money. I mean, you're talking about a significant increase from what the largest reported deal previously has been. USC, $4.3 million over 16 years. This is 5.4 million over 13 years. And so you're talking about a 20% increase annual value over the Coliseum, over USC. I mean, that's a big time historic venue, a big time brand in college football. I think that has, and again, I think it was kind of predictable, but it's lowered the frustration I think that people had with the name. And whereas people yesterday said, Community America Razorback Stadium, I think now they're saying Community America Razorback Stadium. We're very excited about this.
No, totally. And I think, and that makes total sense to me because, like I said, you've heard, they've had the fanfare of, hey guys, we're going to announce this really big deal, and then you announce a name that is not a sexy name, but what corporate name is? I mean, there's pretty much the only exciting ones are Acrisure Bounce House and Pitbull Stadium. Those are the coolest ones. They're the only cool ones, and not everybody can have that. Most of them, as you wrote yesterday in a really good story on HomeLongSports.com, a lot of them are credit unions. This is really common. So I
Hmm.
think when people said, okay, so you've given me this name that is, doesn't sound that cool. It doesn't roll off the tongue, which it never was going to. It's a company I've never heard of. It's not Arkansas. And I also don't know if it's making Arkansas richer. So what is there to really cheer about, and so I understand why people were a little bit let down by that. I was surprised at how intense the response was, like how emotional people sort of were about it. And I'm not saying that's, not good or bad. It's not right or wrong how
Hmm.
you felt about it. I just didn't expect people to feel that strongly because it's not like the Reynolds name. It's not a Neyland Stadium. It's not Kyle Field. It's not these names that have, yes, it's been on the building a long time, but it was also part of an agreement. It had an end date. It was a long agreement and people have gotten really used to that name, but it's not like they're taking Frank Royals Field off there. They're not taking that off. That's never going anywhere. So I was surprised by how big the response was. But I think that having out this number shows everybody, oh, this is a good deal for Arkansas. They have gotten a good deal on this. One thing I will note, that number does not include like whatever, like Learfield will keep some of that. I don't know how much that is. That was not told to me. So how much Arkansas, like their take home pay, I don't know
Hmm.
what that's going to be. Also, they've had these, the building will have sat there without a paid name for 3 years. So they have left some money on the table in that way. So ultimately, yes, they will get this value. I think it is still a big deal. I think it is still a good deal. But it's, like I said, they're not getting a check for $5.4 million every year. That's not what it is. And ultimately, they will, like Learfield will keep some of that.
The Reynolds name, it came off the stadium in 2024, or it hasn't come off the stadium, but the naming rights expired in 2024. I almost feel, though, like Arkansas fell into a better deal by waiting because of the 9 game SEC schedule.
That's
You've
true.
got you've got 9 SEC games. You've got the one power conference game that they've got to play every year. So, whereas in the past, uh, there have been some years where there were only 2 or 3 marquee games in Fayetteville. When you think about War Memorial, AT&T Stadium, both of those have expired. And I don't think they're going to go back to War Memorial. Don't really think that anything's going to happen to AT&T Stadium on a long, like a long-term scale in the future. Um, I think they may have gotten lucky to a certain extent here. And maybe it was strategic. Maybe there was some strategy to that they haven't talked about. I know you're skeptical of that, but you get 5 marquee games on campus. I mean, you think about next year. I think they play in the first year of this naming agreement. It's going to be Alabama, Texas, Ole Miss, Kentucky, and Oklahoma State. I mean, if you are in the case of this credit union, that's 5 marquee games that are going to be on ESPN, ABC, maybe an ESPN2 SEC network, but more often than not, somewhere that's going to have a high visibility. I mean, I have to believe that drove the price up relative to what it might have been if they were going to market 3 years ago.
I think it is a lucky sort of break. I don't think it was intentional. And I still think, in my opinion, they should have had something lined up sooner. Like I think they left a lot on the table. I don't think they would have gotten 5.4 million 3 years
Hmm.
ago. I don't think that we would not be talking about the same number. So to your point, like that is a benefit. And I think It'll be interesting to see if and when some other SEC schools sign deals, like Missouri's shopping, other schools will do this. What they're able to get. So yeah, I think that's a big part of it. The what events are on in that stadium is a large part of the valuation of this deal. Another point that I think is interesting is if you have concerts at your venue, that contributes to the value. So
Yep.
the fact that Arkansas has had and will continue to have things like that international soccer game, things like that concert, that contributes to the value.
They're
Not
trying to
every
get banana
stadium,
ball.
yeah, not every stadium can do that. Different stadiums have different capabilities, different sort of sizes, all that kind of stuff. So they're positioned well for that too, and that's not new. But there's a lot that gets folded into all of this. But that ninth SEC game really does help a lot, and I'm sure there's some schools. I guess there's really only two, Vanderbilt and Kentucky, that already had their deals that are maybe kicking themselves a little bit that they don't have. That game factored into their deals that were from a few
Hmm.
years ago.
I think that one of the reasons, in addition to not having the financial details yesterday, I kind of go back and I think two of the things that maybe upset people were number one, there's a little bit of a stigma around a credit union. Um, but again, you look at, we analyzed 44 stadiums that have naming rights in college football. Five of those are NFL stadiums. And none of the NFL stadiums are credit union, or at least the ones that are shared with colleges. So, really, out of the 39 remaining stadiums, 14 of those are named for credit unions. 23 of them are named for what I would call financial services companies, financial lenders, credit unions, and banks. Really, credit unions have cornered the market when it comes to this type of at least college stadium naming rights. And I really think that what we've seen the last 2 days is a reason why. If you would have asked people at 8 a.m. on Wednesday, what is Community America Credit Union? I doubt 95% of Arkansans could have told you. Now, here we are 24 hours later. I bet 95% of Arkansans can tell you who they are, that they have however many branches in Northwest Arkansas, that they have, the plans to grow their footprint in the state. And that's the power of partnering with a brand that's as big as like the Razorbacks are. So, that's number one. Number two, I think there was a little bit of a disappointment about it not being an in-state company. I mean, I think everybody just kind of assumed that it would be a JB Hunt, a Tyson, a Dillard's, a Stevens, Arvest, whatever. Somebody that we're familiar with that would name this company or name this stadium, a company that would name the stadium. But when you really think about it, what did they get out of naming a stadium where people already know who they are? And would Arkansas get the type of financial value, $5.4 million, with a company who's already got a pretty good foothold in the state? And so, I see this as a win for Arkansas. They just got a big payday from a company who had no previous affiliation with them. And as far as I can tell, they haven't lost the Stevens, they haven't lost the Dillards, they haven't lost the Hunts, they haven't lost the Tysons. They've got a lot of big Arkansas corporations still on their side. I really feel like from a financial standpoint, this is a really good deal for Arkansas.
I really do too. And I think, I was initially surprised that it wasn't an Arkansas company. And then the more, just because I assumed, so many, the huge Jersey patch deal they did with Tyson, that's in state, things like that. I just kind of assumed, I think when you think about this market in this state, you associate a lot of those big businesses with the university and with athletics. And so I was a little surprised. And then, like you said, you think about it a little bit more and it goes, oh, well, if I am they're not doing this out of the goodness of their heart. This is a sponsorship deal. This is a business deal. This is a large chunk of money. And it would have been from any company, maybe not quite this level, but for any company, this is significant. And they're going to have to get some return out of this.
Hmm.
So I think it makes a lot of sense that it is a company that needs to get a foot in the door in Arkansas.
So, Community America Razorback Stadium, 2027 to 2038 will be the years that this company has their name on the stadium. It's going to be called Reynolds Razorback Stadium this year, Donald W. Reynolds Razorback Stadium this year, and then it'll change after this season. Hunter Yurachek was asked about it yesterday. He said that it basically comes down to the time and I guess a little bit of the cost that it takes to change out all the signage. They just didn't think they could get it done before the season begins. So I guess they'll start on that right after the 2026 season ends, and they'll have it ready for 2027. Other big news this week: NBA draft. Darius Acuff goes number 7 overall to the Sacramento Kings. Malik Thomas and Trevin Brazil went back to back on day 2 of the draft, 35 or 34 and 35. Thomas went to the Cleveland Cavaliers via a pick they had from the Kings, and Trevin Brazil went to the Denver Nuggets. I got to tell you, Christina, as I was watching the NBA draft, because I don't watch a whole lot of the NBA draft, I'm sitting here thinking, is it this way every year where like everybody, it felt like every 2 out of every 3 players who got picked were getting picked for a different team. That threw me off big time.
Me too. I was like, what is the point of any of
Yeah.
this? This is dumb. I've never really watched the NBA draft. I'm not an NBA person.
Hmm.
And so I just don't know a whole lot about it. And yeah, I was like, what is even happening? What is the point? I don't
Yeah.
understand. Just call me when we know whose team they're actually on.
Yeah. Well, like the NFL draft, there are trades in the NFL draft. First off, the NFL does not allow uh, trading picks to go nearly as far into the future as the NBA does. Like I was seeing reports where teams are trading picks in like 2032, maybe 2033 in this draft. I don't think in the NFL you can go further than 3 years with your draft picks. Like in the 2026 draft, I don't think you can trade draft picks past 2028, 2029, something like that. So I guess it gives NBA teams a lot more flexibility. But yeah, it's very strange. Like at first, my first initial reaction when Malik Thomas got drafted by the Kings is like, oh, he's going with Darius Acuff. We haven't seen this at Arkansas since Todd Day and Lee Mayberry when they both were drafted in the first round by the Milwaukee Bucks in 1992. And then within like 5 seconds, like, no, no, this is the Cleveland Cavaliers have picked him. So that's kind of interesting. Thomas, you can't do anything about it now. You do wonder about if he would have come back this year, what might his draft been like next year? Because I think if he comes back, he's an All-America type player. I really do. Especially when you don't have Darius Acuff in the same backcourt. Doesn't mean that like they've got they've got good players coming in next year, but I mean I think that Thomas just had a lot. I think he would have had an ability to stand out more next season. We'll put it that way. But he goes in the draft. He's not a first round pick. Maybe he got a little bit of bad advice. Who knows? You just have to ask him. How he feels in retrospect. He's probably still going to get a nice payday. Probably just not maybe what he was expecting that he would get. And then you look at Trevin Brazil. We're not surprised at all by what happened with Acuff. This is kind of in line with what we thought was going to happen with him the whole way. But you look at Brazil. I got to tell you, I was a little surprised that he went that high in the draft. I thought
Me
if he
too.
got drafted, it would probably be more toward the end of the second round. Uh, so, hey, good for him. And what's interesting about him is how many times do you see players be at a school for 4 years? And I know he transferred to Arkansas from Missouri, but he was here for 4 years and he got drafted. You just don't see that very often anymore.
Yeah, I was really surprised to hear his name when we did. And it was cool that they were back to back, but I was like, "Oh my God." I was thought that was coming in like 10 more picks or something. Because a lot of projections had him a little bit later. And yeah, because especially, he is a little bit older, which I think some teams were a little bit wary of. And they can be just because of the age thing. But yeah, he's been around for so long. I was texting, I have a friend who covers the Nuggets, a friend from college, and we went to Missouri and Brazil started at Missouri. And I texted him, I was like, "You're going to get reunited with Trevor Brazil." And he was like, "I can't believe he's in this draft class. Like, I
Yeah.
thought he had been gone." It was so
No.
funny. So I told him, and I was like, "I think Conzo Martin like really liked Trevor Brazil." He was like, "He was here. He knows Conzo Martin. Like, he wasn't a Dennis Gates guy. This is crazy." So it was very funny.
I think there's a lot of parallels between going back to Malik Thomas between his situation and it's different because Malik Thomas wasn't injured and what you're seeing with Carson Wiggins right now in baseball because there's this discussion around Carson Wiggins. Does he come back for another year or does he take the money now? He threw at the MLB scouting combine yesterday in Phoenix. By all indications, he looked really good. I watched it. It just looked like loose and easy, 95, 97. I think that's kind of what you're expecting from him. I don't know that anybody was expecting him to go out there and throw 100, 101, 102 like we've seen him do in a game. But he seems like he's the type who he could probably get close to $2 million this year if he really wanted it. I mean, there just aren't a lot of pitchers who have that fastball off-speed combination that he has in this year's draft. Um, but he could come back to Arkansas, and if he has a really good year, say that he's next year's Hunter Dietz. Who's to say that he couldn't get 7 million, 8 million? And I just see a lot of parallels there between Thomas and Wiggins, and seeing Wiggins this week, it makes me wonder what he'll do.
Yeah, that's the risk these guys have to take. And I think about it, I hate to make a decision. I hate to weigh an option. And I think I do not envy these people that and they're getting all kinds of advice, but these kids that have to decide if they're gonna, take the gamble or not in one way or the other. But yeah, I mean, I think I know a lot of people are hoping that Wiggins comes back. And it's interesting that it doesn't seem like that door is shut. It doesn't seem like it's a certainty that he will go. I think earlier in the season, especially when he got hurt, it was like, all right, well, that's the last time we'll see him in Arkansas. What a bummer. And now it's a little bit like, okay, maybe there's a chance.
Dave Van Horn said today that he thinks that there might be some resolution with Carson Wiggins within the next week or so. Now, whether or not we know that, on the public side, we'll see. But I think that, excuse me, him going to Phoenix, him pitching this week, I think that's going to give the scouts a lot more, uh, maybe a feel one way or the other of how they think about him. And I like to remind people, it only takes one team. It only takes one team to like you and promise you X amount of dollars for that to be the life-changing money that you're looking for in this draft. It does feel like, whether it be though Carson Wiggins, maybe some of these high school players who they went to the combine, AJ Avasco, who's an outfielder from Kansas State, who he's committed to Arkansas. When the combine finishes, because all those players are there in Phoenix right now, when the combine finishes, I think that, at least inside the building, inside the baseball building, they're probably going to have a little bit better feel for how this is going to shake out. We may not know until the draft when a player does get picked or he doesn't get picked, because usually that's the telltale sign. If they get picked, they're probably going to sign. If they don't get drafted, they're probably, well, obviously they're going to wherever their next destination is. But I think we'll probably see some movement here. Arkansas's got an awfully good signing class, or a portal class right now. I mean, they keep adding big time players in the week since we did our last show. Nolan Traeger, a catcher from TCU, publicly committed, although I think he'd been privately committed for about 2 weeks. Chris Diaz is a right-hander from Florida Gulf Coast who committed last night. Baseball America, I think they rank him their number 18 portal prospect this year. So, boy, it's one of those deals where it's like, if they can get this class through the draft, it looks like they could be awfully, talented next year. It's just they got to get through the draft, and there's a lot of draft eligible players in that class that I think you got to keep an eye on.
And that's burned them before. I mean, Dave talked right after their season ended about, that burned them last year, this past year, was somebody that gave them a number of what they were going to get and then left for less than that.
Yeah, he's never said Dylan
And
Grego's name, but it's like Dylan Grego is public enemy number one right now, because he mentioned
yeah,
him after the KU finale, and he mentioned that situation again today. You can tell that's something
he
that
did.
still sticks in their crawl.
Yeah, I haven't gotten to listen to Dave. I've been so worried about the stadium stuff. I haven't even gotten
Mhm.
to take in what Dave said earlier. I know you just put a story online today about that too. But yeah, I mean, that's the problem. That's the issue, and this has plagued them before. So they're really hoping they can get some of these guys on campus.
Of course, the 5-and-5 legislation is really interesting. That's something else that happened this week. Was passed by the NCAA Division I cabinet, where they don't like calling it 5-and-5. The NCAA does not. They want to call it age-based eligibility, but basically it's a 5-year eligibility for players, and you can't extend those 5 years out past 5 years. I guess outside of some real extenuating circumstances, I think pregnancy, LDS, missions. Those are some of the things that might affect it, but there's not a whole lot of ways that you can redshirt anymore. Um, you think about a Nolan Souza. What does he do? Because in past years, this would be his leverage year. He would go pro. Now, I mean, he didn't have a great season. He hasn't really been able to show the scouts in 2 years, a little over a year, but the better part of 2 seasons, what that arm looks like what that shoulder looks like without it being hurt. What does Kuhio Aloy do? Like these are players who now, where this was going to be their leverage year, they got another leverage year next year if they want to do that. And I think there's a real value in having those type of players, like especially a Nolan Souza, who I think his teammates just absolutely love him. I think the coaches love him. He's a hard worker. Yes, sir. No, sir. Real high quality kid and player. And I think he's got a lot more potential than maybe what he's shown on the field to this point. There's real value, Christina, I think, in having a player like that who he can show the ropes to the new guys, to the Kansas State outfielder, to the UCA outfielder, to the Georgia State infielder, and so on and so forth, and say, this is how we do things here. This is what the expectations are here. And that is, I think it's invaluable to have somebody like that who you trust as a coaching staff in your clubhouse.
Do you think that's a contributing factor from this year that they just
Hmm.
didn't have that quite so much?
Oh, I think they
I've
had
talked about
that.
that. You
I
do?
think I think they had it. I think and this was one thing Van Horn talked about today. I just don't think they had the resources last year. They didn't have the time in terms of they couldn't get players on campus, and they didn't have the financial resources. I think it took, and I asked him this today. I think the question was, did it take a season like this where people could see the talent discrepancy between Arkansas and other teams to really get their attention about what you need to have financially? And he said, I think the answer to that question would have to be yes. I mean, I think that if you look at what they did in the portal 2 years ago with players like Charles Davalon and Zach Root, and I know Landon Beidelshees didn't really pan out here the way people thought he would, but he didn't have a terrible year. I mean, he had some good outings for him. I think that when you take that and you compare it to the transfer class that they just had, it wasn't the same. And you even think back to 2 years ago, like Cam Kozel, he was in that portal class, and Kuhio Aloy, he had an All-American season out of that portal class. So they had some portal players who had good years this year, like Kozel, who was an All-American. I just don't think they had the same impact, though, that this class could potentially make if they're able to get all or the bulk of all of these players through.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think, it's been interesting. I appreciate that David is candid about this stuff as he
Oh,
is.
love it.
Like, I think it's great for us, but I also think it's just really it's helpful. It's just helpful to understand, especially because a lot of times when we talk about things like this, we're talking about football and sometimes we're talking about men's basketball. And
Hmm.
so it's been interesting to kind of actually hear of, some real talk about how this is affecting a sport like baseball, where at most schools it is not considered a revenue generating sport, even if, including in Arkansas, even though they treat it like one. They should. It's a big deal for them. It's a big deal for fans here. The only reason it kind of loses money right now is because of some facilities money. But I think it's interesting to see how it affects a program like in Arkansas baseball, where you're at the top of a sport where nationally it's not the most popular sport, but in this state and in this region, it is a huge deal. And it's interesting to see how that kind of things are changing for them specifically.
Going back to leadership, I think they had leadership in the clubhouse this year. I think that you like to have a Ryder Helfer, Cam Kozel. I mean, how could you not like having him, as one of your spokesmen? I just don't think they had the talent. I said this with Bubba on one of the podcasts earlier this year. I said, when was the last time that you watched a game at Baum-Walker Stadium and you said that the other team in the other dugout weekend after weekend after weekend was more talented than Arkansas? And you could have said that when they played Mississippi State. And when I say talent, it's not to say that Arkansas didn't have talent. They just didn't have the same depth of talent that I think these other teams had. You could say it when they played Mississippi State. You could say it when they played Florida. You could certainly say it when they played Georgia. And then, I think there was a discussion to be had when they played Ole Miss, and Oklahoma just won the national championship. So I think it changes next year. I really do. But again, it comes back to they've got to have success here with the Major League Baseball draft, and we've still got a couple of weeks to go, 2.5 weeks or so, before we know a better scope of what's going to happen there.
Yeah, it's going to be stressful. I'm sure the coaches are stressed. I'm sure everybody involved is kind of just waiting for that part to be over.
I think for them to get through August, or maybe through the end of July, like the months of June and July have to be the most stressful for a baseball coach. Like what are we going to have when school starts back up in August? Very, very interesting times for Razorback baseball. We got a lot of stories on our website. You can read all of our coverage from the stadium naming rights, of course, baseball. Today seems like there's a baseball commit about every other day. We've got basketball coverage. It hadn't really slowed down for us this summer like it does a lot of years, but that's okay. We like being busy at WholeHogSports.com. You can read all of Christina's work there and everybody else, Richard Davenport, Anthony Christensen, Ethan Westerman, Richard Davenport, and so on and so forth. Christina, appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much.
All right, we'll see you soon. And we'll see all of you next week on our show. Have a great week.